John Quincy Adams was a Massachusetts statesman and a complex political figure who became one of the most intellectually distinguished presidents in American history. John Quincy Adams, 6th President of the United States and later Congressman, was born in Braintree, Massachusetts on July 11, 1767. He came from America's most prominent political family. He had a stern demeanor and unwavering commitment to principle. Adams's early years were marked by extraordinary educational opportunities and immense paternal expectations. He witnessed the Battle of Bunker Hill as a boy, watching the smoke rise over Boston from his family's farm. His mother, Abigail Adams, one of the most remarkable women of her generation, supervised his early education with exacting standards. His father, John Adams, would become the 2nd President of the United States, setting a standard of achievement that would both inspire and burden his son throughout his life. In 1778, at the age of 10, young John Quincy accompanied his father to France, where the elder Adams served as a diplomat during the Revolutionary War. This journey began an extraordinary education in European politics and culture. He studied at schools in Paris and Amsterdam, learning French, Dutch, and later German. He read classical literature and modern philosophy. By his early teens, he had traveled more extensively and received a more cosmopolitan education than almost any American of his generation. At 14, Adams served as secretary and interpreter to Francis Dana, the American minister to Russia. He spent over a year in St. Petersburg, navigating the intricacies of European diplomacy while still an adolescent. This experience gave him insights into international relations that would prove invaluable throughout his career. He returned to America in 1785 and entered Harvard College, graduating in 1787. Despite his extensive European education, he found Harvard intellectually stimulating and made lifelong friendships there. After graduating from Harvard, Adams studied law and was admitted to the bar in 1790. He established a legal practice in Boston, but his heart was never truly in the law. He was drawn to politics and public service, following the path his father had blazed. His legal career was merely a prelude to the diplomatic and political work that would define his life. In 1794, President George Washington appointed Adams as minister to the Netherlands. He was only 27 years old, but his diplomatic experience and language skills made him well qualified for the position. During his time in the Netherlands, he sent detailed reports to the State Department analyzing European political developments. His dispatches were so insightful that Washington promoted him to minister to Portugal in 1796. However, before Adams could take up the Portugal post, his father became president and reassigned him to Prussia. John Quincy served as minister to Prussia from 1797 to 1801, negotiating a treaty of amity and commerce between the United States and Prussia. This was his first major diplomatic achievement, demonstrating his skill at negotiation and his understanding of international law. In 1797, while on a brief visit to London, Adams met Louisa Catherine Johnson, the daughter of an American merchant. They married in London in July 1797. Louisa was born in England and had spent most of her life in Europe, making her as cosmopolitan as her husband. The marriage would last 50 years and produce 4 children, though it was often strained by Adams's devotion to public service and his difficult personality. Louisa was cultured, intelligent, and musically talented, but she struggled with depression and the constant relocations that diplomatic life required. When Thomas Jefferson became president in 1801, he recalled Adams from Prussia. The younger Adams returned to America and resumed his legal practice in Boston. However, he could not stay away from politics for long. In 1802, he was elected to the Massachusetts State Senate. The following year, the Massachusetts legislature elected him to the United States Senate. As a senator, Adams quickly established himself as an independent thinker who refused to follow party orthodoxy. Although elected as a Federalist, he frequently broke with his party when he believed principle demanded it. His support for Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase angered Massachusetts Federalists who opposed Western expansion. His support for Jefferson's embargo policies in 1807 was the final straw. The embargo was deeply unpopular in New England, where it devastated maritime commerce. Adams believed it was necessary to avoid war with Britain, and he voted for it despite knowing it would destroy his political career in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts legislature responded by electing his replacement 9 months early, a clear rebuke. Adams resigned from the Senate in 1808 rather than serve out his term under such circumstances. He had chosen principle over political survival, a pattern that would repeat throughout his career. His willingness to defy his own party earned him respect from some quarters but made him politically homeless. The Federalists considered him a traitor, while the Republicans viewed him with suspicion despite his support for their policies. In 1809, President James Madison appointed Adams as the first American minister to Russia. Adams spent the next 5 years in St. Petersburg, working to maintain good relations with Russia during the Napoleonic Wars. Tsar Alexander I took a personal liking to Adams, and the two men had many long conversations about politics, philosophy, and religion. Adams's dispatches from Russia provided the American government with valuable intelligence about European affairs. He witnessed Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812 and its catastrophic retreat. He understood that Napoleon's defeat would reshape European politics and create new opportunities and challenges for the United States. In 1814, Adams was selected to lead the American delegation negotiating peace with Britain to end the War of 1812. The negotiations took place in Ghent, in present-day Belgium. Adams worked alongside Henry Clay, Albert Gallatin, and other American commissioners. The negotiations were difficult and protracted. The British initially demanded major territorial concessions, including the creation of an Indian buffer state in the Northwest Territory. Adams and his colleagues refused these demands, and eventually, the British position softened as the war in Europe ended and Britain's interest in the American conflict waned. The Treaty of Ghent, signed on December 24, 1814, essentially restored the status quo ante bellum. It resolved none of the issues that had caused the war, but it ended the fighting and allowed both nations to move forward. Adams considered it a diplomatic victory because it preserved American sovereignty and territorial integrity. After Ghent, Adams was appointed minister to Britain, the most prestigious diplomatic post in the American Foreign Service. He served in London from 1815 to 1817, working to normalize relations between the former colonies and the mother country. His experience and diplomatic skill made him highly effective in this role. In 1817, President James Monroe called Adams home to serve as Secretary of State. Adams accepted and returned to America after 8 years abroad. As Secretary of State, Adams would have the opportunity to shape American foreign policy during a crucial period of national expansion. His tenure as Secretary of State from 1817 to 1825 was the most successful period of his career. He was arguably the greatest Secretary of State in American history, crafting policies that defined American foreign relations for generations. His first major achievement was negotiating the Adams-Onís Treaty with Spain in 1819. This treaty acquired Florida for the United States and established the boundary between American and Spanish territory all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Adams spent months negotiating with Spanish Minister Luis de Onís, carefully balancing firmness with diplomacy. The treaty was a masterstroke of negotiation, gaining vast territory for America while avoiding war with Spain. Adams also played a crucial role in formulating what became known as the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President Monroe issued a statement warning European powers against further colonization or intervention in the Americas. While Monroe's name became attached to the policy, Adams was its primary architect. He drafted much of the language and argued for its key principles. The Monroe Doctrine established American hemispheric leadership and became a cornerstone of American foreign policy. During his time as Secretary of State, Adams also negotiated treaties with Britain that established fishing rights, border demarcation, and other practical matters. He worked to suppress the international slave trade, though his efforts were only partially successful. He managed relations with the newly independent Latin American republics, balancing American interests with recognition of their sovereignty. Adams's success as Secretary of State made him the leading candidate to succeed Monroe as president. However, the presidential election of 1824 was one of the most controversial in American history. Four candidates ran, all nominally from the same party, the Democratic Republicans. The Federalist Party had collapsed, leaving America in an era of good feelings with only one major party. The candidates were Adams, Andrew Jackson, William Crawford, and Henry Clay. Jackson won the most popular votes and the most electoral votes, but he did not win a majority of electoral votes as required by the Constitution. Under the 12th Amendment, the election went to the House of Representatives, which would choose among the top 3 candidates. Henry Clay, who finished 4th, was eliminated but remained Speaker of the House with enormous influence over the outcome. Clay and Adams met and discussed policy. They shared similar views on federal support for internal improvements and economic development. Clay threw his support to Adams, and the House elected Adams president on the first ballot. When Adams then appointed Clay as his Secretary of State, Jackson supporters cried foul. They claimed a corrupt bargain had been struck, with Clay delivering the presidency to Adams in exchange for the State Department. The charge haunted Adams throughout his presidency. There is no evidence that any explicit deal was made, but the appearance of impropriety was damaging. Jackson and his supporters believed the presidency had been stolen, and they spent the next 4 years working to deny Adams a second term. Adams's presidency from 1825 to 1829 was frustrating and largely unsuccessful. He had an ambitious agenda for national development, including federal funding for roads, canals, and other infrastructure, establishment of a national university, and support for scientific exploration. His vision was of an activist federal government promoting national improvement and development. However, he faced implacable opposition from Jackson supporters in Congress. They blocked his initiatives at every turn, viewing obstruction of Adams as the path to Jackson's election in 1828. Adams lacked the political skills to overcome this opposition. He refused to use patronage to build political support, considering it corrupt. He would not campaign for himself or engage in the kind of political maneuvering that might have strengthened his position. Adams's high-minded approach to politics was admirable but ineffective. He accomplished little during his 4 years as president. His administration was competent and scandal-free, but it was also stalled and ineffectual. The 1828 presidential campaign was one of the nastiest in American history. Jackson supporters attacked Adams as an elitist and aristocrat out of touch with common Americans. They dredged up old accusations and spread false rumors. Adams's supporters responded with equally vicious attacks on Jackson, including accusations about his wife's virtue. Adams himself largely stayed above the fray, but his supporters engaged in the mudslinging enthusiastically. Jackson won the election decisively, carrying both the popular vote and the Electoral College. Adams was crushed by the defeat. He had served his country faithfully for decades, yet he was rejected by the voters. He left Washington immediately after Jackson's inauguration, not even attending the ceremony. He returned to Massachusetts expecting to retire from public life. However, Adams's public career was far from over. In 1830, he was elected to the House of Representatives from his Massachusetts district. Some considered it beneath the dignity of a former president to serve in Congress, but Adams disagreed. He believed public service was its own reward, regardless of the office. He would serve in the House for the next 17 years, becoming one of its most influential and controversial members. In Congress, Adams became a fierce opponent of slavery and the slave power. He had long harbored anti-slavery views, though as president he had avoided the issue to maintain national unity. Now, freed from executive responsibilities, he could speak his conscience. He fought against the gag rule, which automatically tabled anti-slavery petitions without discussion. For 8 years, Adams waged a lonely battle against this rule, arguing that it violated the First Amendment right to petition the government. He presented anti-slavery petitions session after session, forcing votes and debates. He was censured by the House for his efforts, but he never stopped fighting. Finally, in 1844, the gag rule was repealed, a major victory for Adams and the anti-slavery cause. Adams also opposed the annexation of Texas, which he correctly saw as a scheme to extend slavery. He spoke passionately against the Mexican-American War, viewing it as an unjust war of aggression designed to acquire more slave territory. His opposition to the war was unpopular, even in Massachusetts, but Adams never wavered. He also argued the famous Amistad case before the Supreme Court in 1841. African captives who had rebelled aboard the slave ship Amistad were being held in Connecticut, and their fate hung in the balance. Adams, then 73 years old, came out of legal retirement to argue for their freedom. He spoke for 8 hours over 2 days, presenting a passionate defense of natural rights and human liberty. The court ruled in favor of the Africans, and they were allowed to return home. It was one of Adams's proudest moments. Throughout his congressional career, Adams kept a detailed diary, as he had done since adolescence. His diary eventually filled 51 volumes and provides an unparalleled record of American political life in the early republic. He wrote about politics, diplomacy, literature, religion, and his own thoughts and feelings. The diary reveals a man of enormous intellect and learning, but also one who was often difficult, judgmental, and melancholy. Adams struggled with depression throughout his life and was frequently disappointed in himself and others. On February 21, 1848, Adams suffered a massive stroke on the floor of the House of Representatives. He collapsed at his desk while the House was in session. He was carried to the Speaker's room, where he lingered for 2 days, drifting in and out of consciousness. His last words were reported to be, "This is the last of Earth. I am content." John Quincy Adams died on February 23, 1848, at the age of 80. He had served his country for over 50 years in various capacities. His funeral was held in the House chamber, and he was buried beside his parents in Quincy, Massachusetts. The nation mourned the loss of one of its last links to the founding generation. Adams's legacy is complex and multifaceted. As a diplomat, he was brilliant, helping to secure American independence through the Treaty of Ghent and expanding American territory through the Adams-Onis Treaty. As Secretary of State, he was arguably the best in American history, shaping foreign policy for decades through the Monroe Doctrine and other initiatives. As president, he was largely unsuccessful, unable to implement his vision of national development in the face of political opposition. As a congressman, he was a moral voice against slavery, fighting battles that would not be won until after his death. Modern historians rank Adams as an above-average president, recognizing that his failures in that office were due more to political circumstances than to personal inadequacy. His greatest contributions came in diplomacy and in his congressional career, where his principles and intellect could shine without the constraints of executive politics. Adams represents a particular type of American leader, the intellectual statesman who valued principle over popularity and service over personal advancement. He was brilliant but difficult, principled but inflexible, learned but sometimes pedantic. He never achieved the popular acclaim that his talents deserved, in part because he disdained the political arts necessary to win such acclaim. Perhaps the most fitting assessment of John Quincy Adams is that he was a man of the Enlightenment serving in an age of democracy. He believed in reason, education, and disinterested public service. He thought leaders should be chosen for their abilities and character rather than their popularity. These views were increasingly out of step with Jacksonian democracy, which emphasized the common man and popular sovereignty. Adams never fully adapted to this new political world, which contributed to his presidential failure but also to his moral authority in his later years. In the end, John Quincy Adams was a great American who served his country with distinction in multiple capacities over more than half a century. His diplomatic achievements helped secure American independence and expansion. His anti-slavery advocacy helped lay the groundwork for the abolition movement. His intellectual contributions, particularly his diary, provide invaluable insights into the early American Republic. He was not a perfect man or a perfect president, but he was a man of integrity, learning, and unwavering commitment to his principles. Adams died as he had lived, in service to his country, collapsing at his post in the House of Representatives. It was a fitting end for a man who had devoted his entire adult life to public service. He is remembered today not primarily for his presidency, which was his least successful major office, but for his diplomatic brilliance, his moral courage in opposing slavery, and his lifetime of dedicated service to the American Republic.